5 senior habits that secretly destroy your retirement. We all think we know what retirement killers look like. Market crashes, medical emergencies, unexpected layoffs. But what if the real danger isn't what happens to you, but what you do to yourself? What if the most dangerous retirement threats aren't dramatic events, but quiet habits that feel innocent, even virtuous, until one day they're not? Today, I want to introduce you to 5 people whose retirements collapsed not from catastrophe, but from choices that seemed harmless at the time. 5 ordinary people whose financial security eroded not in moments, but in years of small decisions that felt right in their hearts, but destroyed their futures. Their names have been changed, but their stories are happening right now, in homes just like yours. Because financial disaster rarely announces itself. It whispers, it reassures, it tells you everything will be fine, until suddenly it isn't. This is the story of 5 retirement habits that feel like love, generosity, and wisdom, until they reveal themselves as something else entirely. Lena Morales, the guilt that drained her. At 71, Lena Morales had the kind of smile that made you immediately feel at home. Warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners, silver hair always neatly styled, and a small apartment filled with photographs of her 3 children and 7 grandchildren. Family was everything to me, she told me when we sat down in her modest 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Phoenix. As Lena spoke, her hands clutched a faded photo of her youngest grandchild. Still is. But I realize now that I didn't understand the difference between supporting them and, well, sacrificing everything. 20 years earlier, Lena had gone through a bitter divorce after 32 years of marriage. Her ex-husband had been the family's primary breadwinner, while Lena had worked part-time as a school secretary, taking time off when her children were young. The divorce left her with half their retirement savings, the smaller of their 2 cars, and a weight of guilt that would shape the next 2 decades of her financial decisions. I felt like I had destroyed our family, Lena said, her fingers tracing the embroidered edge of a throw pillow. My oldest wouldn't speak to me for almost a year. My youngest was still in college. I became obsessed with making it up to them somehow. This is where Lena's first dangerous habit began. Over-gifting to adult children, driven by divorce guilt. I taught them that money appears magically when needed, and now none of us have enough. It started small. When her daughter Rebecca needed first and last month's rent for a new apartment, Lena offered the $3,000 from her emergency fund. When her son Michael's car broke down, she provided $4,500 for repairs, even though he was employed full-time. Her youngest, Tyler, struggled with student loan payments while starting his career, so Lena began silently paying $400 monthly toward his debt. I never told them I was dipping into my retirement accounts for these gifts, Lena explained. I was taking early withdrawals, paying the penalties, but I convinced myself it was temporary, that once they were all stable, I'd focus on rebuilding my savings. But the requests never stopped, and Lena never learned to say no. As her children entered their 30s and 40s, the financial needs only grew. Down payments for homes, help with grandchildren's private school tuition, loans for business ventures that her children swore they would repay, but never did. I don't think they realized what it was costing me, Lena said quietly. I never told them I was gradually liquidating my retirement accounts. I never showed them my dwindling statements. I was still trying to be the perfect mother, the one who never let them down. By 68, Lena had depleted nearly 70% of her retirement savings through a combination of early withdrawals, loans against her 401k, and investing in her children's sometimes risky ventures. She had ignored her financial advisor's increasingly alarmed warnings, convinced that family loyalty trumped financial sense. The breaking point came 3 years ago, when her hot water heater burst, flooding her condo. The $5,000 insurance deductible wasn't in her budget. For the first time, Lena had to ask her children for help. The silence was deafening, she recalled, tears welling in her eyes. Not because they didn't want to help, but because they couldn't. My son was overextended on his mortgage. My daughters had credit card debt. They'd patterned their financial lives after mine, spending what they didn't have, assuming someone would always be there with a safety net. Today, Lena works part-time as a receptionist, despite arthritis that makes typing painful. Her social security check covers rent and utilities, but little else. The photos of her grandchildren sit on shelves from a discount store in a rental apartment she can barely afford. The irony is that I thought I was showing love, Lena said, her voice breaking slightly. But real love would have meant teaching them financial independence while securing my own future. Instead, I taught them that money appears magically when needed, and now none of us have enough. Lena's story illustrates a painful truth. When financial support flows only one way for too long, it doesn't just drain accounts, it creates dependency that hurts everyone involved. Her habit of financial rescuing, born from divorce guilt, didn't just destroy her retirement, it undermined her children's financial resilience too. If I could go back, Lena told me as I was leaving, I'd still help them when it truly mattered. But I'd set boundaries. I'd be honest about my limitations. And I'd remember that my financial security wasn't just for me, it was for them too. Because now, in my 70s, I've become the burden I never wanted to be. Jeanette Holloway, the cost of one signature. Jeanette Holloway never considered herself financially sophisticated. A former elementary school teacher who had raised 3 children in suburban Ohio, she had always left the financial planning to her husband, Richard. When he died suddenly at 62, Jeanette, then 63, found herself navigating retirement alone. Richard had everything organized, Jeanette told me, as we sat in the small apartment complex for seniors where she now lives. Pension, social security, our investments. He had spreadsheets for everything. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough for me to live comfortably for the rest of my life. At first, Jeanette had followed Richard's careful plan, but 3 years into her widowhood, her oldest granddaughter, Amber, was accepted to her dream college, an expensive private university across the country. Amber was the first in our family to go to a prestigious school like that, Jeanette recalled, pride evident in her voice. But the financial aid package wasn't what they'd hoped. My son and his wife were going to have to tell her she couldn't go. That's when Jeanette made the decision that would ultimately derail her retirement. She offered to co-sign Amber's student loans. This was Jeanette's dangerous retirement habit, co-signing loans in retirement without understanding the full risk. I signed those papers without really understanding that I was gambling with my entire future. I didn't think much about it at the time, Jeanette admitted. The financial aid officer made it seem routine. Just a formality, he said. With my good credit score, Amber qualified for better interest rates. I was just helping her get an education. What Jeanette didn't fully comprehend was that co-signing meant she was equally responsible for repaying the debt, all $150,000 of it. Her fixed income and age made her an ideal co-signer from the lender's perspective. She had assets that could be claimed and a predictable income stream through Social Security and her teacher's pension. For 2 years, everything seemed fine. Amber thrived at university, and Jeanette felt she had honored Richard's memory by helping their granddaughter. Then, in Amber's junior year, the situation unraveled. Amber decided college wasn't for her after all, Jeanette explained, her fingers nervously adjusting the photo frame on her side table. She dropped out and moved in with friends in California. She promised she'd get a job and start making the loan payments when they came due. But Amber struggled to find stable employment. When the grace period ended and the first payment notice arrived, it came to Jeanette's address. $487 a month, Jeanette said softly. For 20 years. The payment was almost a quarter of my monthly income. I called Amber in a panic, and she promised she'd figure something out. But 3 months later, I got a letter saying the loan was delinquent. Jeanette dipped into her savings to bring the loan current, certain that Amber would soon take over. Instead, a pattern developed, Jeanette making payments from her retirement accounts when Amber couldn't, or sometimes it seemed wouldn't. I tried talking to her parents, but they were dealing with their own financial problems after my son was laid off, Jeanette explained. I couldn't bear the thought of ruining Amber's credit at the start of her adult life, so I kept paying, month after month. 5 years later, Jeanette had depleted her non-pension savings and was cutting back on essentials to make the loan payments. Her careful retirement budget had no room for this substantial obligation. When she developed cataracts that her insurance only partially covered, she delayed the surgery because she couldn't afford the out-of-pocket costs. That's when my other children realized how bad things had gotten, Jeanette said. I was choosing between my prescriptions and keeping Amber's loans from going into default. Today, at 68, Jeanette lives in subsidized senior housing, her dreams of traveling in retirement abandoned. The remaining student loan balance, still over $100,000, will follow her for another 15 years. Richard would be so disappointed in me, she whispered. Not for trying to help our granddaughter, but for risking the security he worked so hard to provide. I signed those papers without really understanding that I was gambling with my entire future. Jeanette's situation reflects a growing trend among retirees who don't realize that co-signing educational loans can threaten retirement security. Unlike other debts, student loans offer few discharge options, even in bankruptcy, making them particularly dangerous for those on fixed incomes. I love Amber, and I still believe in education, Jeanette said firmly, her hands clutching a faded photo of her grandchildren's graduation. But I wish I had found another way to support her dreams, one that didn't compromise my basic needs in retirement, because now I can't help anyone, least of all myself. The hardest part, Jeanette confessed, was the growing tension with her son, Amber's father. He avoided me for almost a year after I told him I couldn't make the payments anymore. He felt I was abandoning his daughter, but he couldn't see I had already abandoned myself. Her voice trembled. We're speaking again now, but something broke between us that may never fully heal. As I left her apartment, Jeanette handed me a small, folded note. Give this to any grandparent thinking of co-signing a student loan, she said. Inside, she had written, Love doesn't require your signature on a legal document. Find another way to help. Edwin Brooks, The House That Pride Built. If you drove through the historic district of Burlington, Vermont, you couldn't miss Edwin Brooks's Victorian home. 3 stories of faded blue grandeur with a wraparound porch and intricate gingerbread trim that Edwin had painstakingly restored himself over the years. At 76, Edwin was as much a fixture of the neighborhood as his home. A retired high school principal with a booming laugh and precise diction, he took visible pride in maintaining the property that had been in his family for 3 generations. My grandfather bought this house in 1937, Edwin explained as he guided me through rooms filled with antique furniture and family heirlooms. He was the first black principal in the county. This house was a statement, proof that we belonged here, that we had achieved something meaningful. The 4,200 square foot home had been the site of family gatherings, community meetings, and countless holiday celebrations. But as we sat in his study, surrounded by photographs chronicling decades of family history, Edwin reluctantly acknowledged what those pictures didn't show: how his refusal to downsize had systematically destroyed his financial future. This was Edwin's dangerous retirement habit, refusing to right-size his housing, allowing pride and emotional attachment to override financial sense. Young people talk about FOMO, fear of missing out. But there's something worse in retirement, FOLO, fear of letting go. When Caroline, my wife, was diagnosed with Parkinson's in our early 60s, our financial advisor suggested selling, Edwin admitted, his voice growing quieter. The property taxes had tripled since we paid off the mortgage. The maintenance costs were consuming nearly 40% of our monthly budget. But Edwin couldn't bear the thought of selling his family legacy. The house represented everything he had worked for, status in the community, a physical manifestation of his family's journey from segregation to respect. Even as Caroline's condition worsened, requiring expensive modifications to the house and eventually in-home care, Edwin refused to consider alternatives. I kept telling myself that things would improve, that our investments would catch up, that the house was an investment too, he explained. But the truth is, I was spending thousands each month just to keep it standing. Money that should have been going toward Caroline's care and our future. In the harsh Vermont winters, heating bills for the drafty Victorians sometimes reached $1,200 monthly. The roof needed replacement every 20 years, a $30,000 expense. The property's historical designation meant repairs had to meet specific standards, often doubling their cost. Edwin had drained his IRA to replace the plumbing system 5 years ago. Then he'd taken a reverse mortgage to fund Caroline's growing medical needs. Each decision felt necessary in the moment, but collectively, they had created a financial vice that tightened each year. When Caroline passed away last year, I realized I was living alone in a museum I could no longer afford, Edwin said. 3/4 of my retirement income was going to this house. I couldn't keep up with the basic maintenance, let alone the property taxes. Now, Edwin faces an impossible situation. The reverse mortgage has consumed much of his equity. Deferred maintenance has reduced the home's market value. At 76, with declining health himself, he's trapped in a house that's literally falling apart around him. My daughter wants me to move in with her family in Colorado, Edwin sighed. But I've lost so much of my savings that I can't even offer to contribute to their household expenses. If I'd sold 10 years ago, when the market was strong and Caroline and I were still healthy enough to enjoy a new chapter, his voice trailed off. Edwin's pride in homeownership, something that had defined his identity for decades, had become the very thing threatening his dignity in old age. Young people talk about FOMO, fear of missing out, Edwin said with a wry smile. But there's something worse in retirement. FOLO, fear of letting go. I couldn't let go of what this house symbolized, and now I have nothing else to hold on to. Arthur Kim, the plan that never was. Arthur Kim had built a successful dental practice through meticulous attention to detail. His office procedures were models of efficiency. His treatment plans were comprehensive and forward-thinking. At 73, retired for over a decade, he maintained the precise manner and careful speech patterns of someone accustomed to being the expert in the room, which made the chaos of his current situation all the more shocking. I always told my patients, prevention is easier than treatment, Arthur said as we met in the small garden behind his son's home in suburban Maryland, where Arthur now lived in a converted garage apartment. Arthur paused, eyes scanning the garden his wife once loved, filled with roses now tended by his daughter-in-law. But when it came to my own estate planning, I became the worst kind of patient, the one who keeps postponing the important appointment. Arthur's dangerous retirement habit, postponing estate planning because he felt too healthy to worry. I used to tell patients, small problems don't stay small forever. A hairline crack becomes a broken tooth. The same is true with estate planning. For years, Arthur's wife Sarah had urged him to create a comprehensive estate plan. They had substantial assets. The proceeds from the sale of his practice, investment properties, retirement accounts, and a vacation home in the Outer Banks. But Arthur, proud of his robust health and family history of longevity, always found reasons to delay. "Next year," he would tell Sarah, "when things settle down, when the market is more stable, when we finish renovating the beach house." Then, 6 years ago, Sarah was diagnosed with aggressive ovarian cancer. Within 8 months, she was gone. "Even then, I told myself I had time," Arthur admitted, his composed exterior cracking slightly. "I was grieving. I couldn't focus on paperwork and lawyers, and I was still healthy, still playing tennis 3 times a week, still traveling. My father lived to 97. I thought I had decades to sort things out." 2 years after Sarah's death, Arthur suffered a severe stroke while alone in his home. He lay undiscovered for nearly 18 hours before a neighbor checked on him. The stroke affected his speech and mobility, but most significantly, it impaired his cognitive function, particularly his executive decision-making abilities. "I woke up in the hospital, unable to communicate clearly," Arthur recalled. "And suddenly, all those tasks I'd postponed became urgent. But now I wasn't legally capable of executing them myself." Because Arthur had no powers of attorney in place, neither for healthcare nor for financial decisions, his 3 adult children faced a legal labyrinth. No single person had clear authority to make medical decisions or manage his finances. His assets were scattered across accounts, some only in his name, others still jointly held with his deceased wife. "My children had to petition the court to establish guardianship," Arthur explained, the words coming slowly but precisely. "It took 8 months and cost over $50,000 in legal fees, money that came from the assets they were trying to protect. During those 8 months, Arthur's finances fell into disarray. Bills went unpaid, affecting his credit score. His investment accounts remained static during a major market downturn because no one had authority to make changes. Property taxes on the vacation home became delinquent, triggering penalties. The irony is that I had always planned to leave each child an equal share," Arthur said. "Instead, my son Daniel had to liquidate one of my investment accounts just to cover the legal costs of accessing the others." Even after guardianship was established, the problems continued. Without an estate plan specifying his wishes, Arthur's children disagreed about his care and financial decisions. His daughter believed he should move to an assisted living facility. His sons thought he could remain independent with home care. "These are good people who love each other, and me," Arthur emphasized. "But grief, stress, and unclear expectations can strain any relationship. Without written guidance from me, they each believed they were advocating for what I would want." Today, Arthur lives in an in-law suite at his son's house, a compromise that works but wasn't anyone's first choice. His vacation home had to be sold to create a care fund, destroying his dream of leaving that property to his grandchildren. His once substantial estate has been reduced by emergency planning, crisis management fees, and suboptimal financial decisions made during the guardianship process. "People think estate planning is about death," Arthur said, carefully forming each word. "But it's really about living, about ensuring you maintain control even when you can't actively exercise it anymore." As a healthcare professional, Arthur had spent decades emphasizing preventive care to his patients. Yet in his personal financial life, he had practiced precisely the opposite philosophy. "I used to tell patients, small problems don't stay small forever. A hairline crack becomes a broken tooth. Mild inflammation becomes serious infection," Arthur said. "The same is true with estate planning. The small inconvenience of creating documents becomes a crisis when you wait too long." For Arthur, the cost of procrastination wasn't just financial. It was the loss of autonomy and the creation of family tension that might never fully heal. "My children are still struggling with decisions I should have made myself," he concluded. "That's not a burden any parent should leave behind. Not when a few days with an attorney could have prevented it all." Martha Dunn, the deductible that cost her everything. Martha Dunn had spent 42 years as a hospital nurse, caring for others through their most vulnerable moments. At 70, she had been retired for 8 years from her position as nursing supervisor at a busy urban medical center. "I saw everything on that job," Martha told me, sitting in a recliner in her daughter's living room, an oxygen tube looped beneath her nose. Miracle recoveries, devastating diagnoses. I held patients' hands through both. After 4 decades in healthcare, Martha understood the medical system better than most. She knew how to advocate for patients, navigate insurance claims, and interpret complex treatment plans, which makes her dangerous retirement habit all the more tragic, delaying necessary medical care due to fear of costs. When you avoid necessary care, you're not saving money. You're just spending it later, when treatments are more expensive and less effective. "The irony isn't lost on me," Martha said with a rueful smile, adjusting the oxygen tube with practiced nurses' hands. "I spent my career telling people not to ignore symptoms, and then I did exactly that when it was my own health on the line." Martha's retirement had started well enough. With Medicare coverage, a pension from the hospital, and modest savings, she lived comfortably in the small home she'd owned for 30 years. She traveled occasionally to visit grandchildren and volunteered at a community clinic 2 days a week. The trouble began 3 years into retirement, when Martha noticed increasing shortness of breath during her regular walks. As a nurse, she recognized the potential warning signs. But instead of seeking immediate care, she made a fateful calculation. "I had a $6,000 deductible on my Medicare Advantage plan," Martha explained. "Testing would mean echocardiograms, maybe a stress test, potentially even a cardiac catheterization. I'd just helped my sister go through similar issues, and even with her insurance, she paid nearly $5,000 out of pocket." So Martha made the decision countless retirees make every day. She decided to wait. She told herself the symptoms were probably nothing serious, just age or perhaps lingering effects from a cold. She cut back on her walking, took more rest breaks, and hoped the problem would resolve itself. "I kept thinking about that deductible," Martha admitted. "In my mind, I was being financially responsible. I'd worked with so many seniors who were bankrupted by medical bills. I was determined not to let that happen to me." 6 months later, when Martha finally collapsed while carrying groceries into her house, the diagnosis was grim: advanced heart failure that had progressed to the point where her treatment options were severely limited. "The cardiologist told me that if I'd come in when symptoms first appeared, medication and lifestyle changes might have been enough," Martha said, her voice breaking slightly. "Instead, I was looking at a heart that was functioning at 25% capacity and permanent damage that couldn't be reversed." The cruel mathematics of Martha's situation quickly became clear. By avoiding what might have been a few $1,000s in early diagnostic costs, she now faced catastrophic medical expenses. Her condition required hospitalization, specialized treatments, and eventually home oxygen and part-time care assistance. "Within 18 months, I had not only hit that deductible I'd been so afraid of, but I'd also spent through most of my savings," Martha explained. "And my health was deteriorating so rapidly that I couldn't live independently anymore." Martha had to sell her home at a loss because she needed to close quickly and move in with her daughter's family. The proceeds from the house created a care fund, but at the current rate of spending, it would be depleted before Martha turned 75. "The worst part isn't the money," Martha said quietly. "It's that I robbed myself of years of quality life. I could have been traveling to see my youngest grandchildren grow up. Instead, I can barely make it up the stairs without gasping for breath." Martha's story highlights a devastating pattern among retirees: delaying preventive care or early intervention due to cost concerns, only to face far greater expenses when untreated conditions become critical. "As a nurse, I saw this happen to patients all the time," Martha reflected. They'd avoid the $200 office visit and end up with a $20,000 hospital stay. But somehow, I convinced myself my situation was different. For Martha, fear of medical expenses didn't protect her retirement savings. It accelerated their depletion while simultaneously diminishing her quality of life. "If I could tell retirees one thing," Martha said as our conversation ended, "it would be this. Budgeting for healthcare isn't just a financial issue. It's a quality of life issue. When you avoid necessary care, you're not saving money. You're just spending it later, when treatments are more expensive and less effective." Today, Martha's retirement looks nothing like she had planned. Instead of the independent, active lifestyle she had worked toward for decades, she depends on family for basic needs and watches her remaining savings vanish into medical bills that might have been avoided with earlier intervention. "I was penny-wise and pound-foolish," Martha concluded, adjusting her oxygen flow. "And I paid for that mistake not just with my money, but with my independence." The hidden pattern: 5 different lives, 5 different mistakes. But underlying them all is a single truth. Our financial habits are rarely just about money. They're expressions of our emotions, our values, our fears, and our hopes. Lena's overgifting wasn't really about generosity. It was about assuaging divorce guilt and seeking her children's approval. Edwin's refusal to downsize wasn't about a house. It was about preserving his identity and legacy in a tangible form. Jeanette's co-signing wasn't about education. It was about wanting to be the grandmother who makes dreams possible, even at the cost of her own security. Arthur's procrastination wasn't about paperwork. It was about denying mortality and clinging to a self-image of invincibility. Martha's delayed healthcare wasn't about saving money. It was about fear of becoming the financially devastated patients she had cared for throughout her career. In each case, what looked like a financial decision was actually an emotional one, in disguise. And that's what makes these habits so dangerous. They bypass our rational thinking by appealing to our deepest feelings. The most destructive financial behaviors don't announce themselves as risks. They feel like virtues: generosity, heritage preservation, helping family, optimism, frugality. They come disguised as love, loyalty, and prudence. This is why they persist even when the math clearly shows their danger. We aren't calculating returns on investment. We're seeking emotional returns that no spreadsheet can capture. But as each of these stories shows, those emotional returns eventually deplete, leaving only financial consequences that can't be reversed in retirement years when time for recovery has run out. The takeaway: habits feel harmless until they aren't. And in retirement, the habits that feel most natural, most aligned with your values, can be the very ones that quietly undermine everything you've worked for. The protection of your future begins with honest reflection today. Are your financial decisions truly about money, or are they attempts to address deeper emotional needs? Are you preserving your retirement, or are you unconsciously sacrificing it to alleviate guilt, maintain status, avoid difficult conversations, or postpone uncomfortable realities? True financial wisdom in retirement isn't just about knowing the right moves. It's about understanding your own motivations before those moves become patterns that can't be broken until it's too late. Which of these stories hit closest to home? Or maybe you've seen this happen to someone you love. Let's talk about it in the comments. Your insight could help someone else facing the same crossroads. And if you know someone who needs to hear these lessons, share this video with them. You could change their life. And if you believe real stories can change lives, please like this video and subscribe to Gold Print. New, powerful retirement stories every week.